it annoys me beyond measure that now, when they improved Zoom, a voice is telling me that the recording is activated, and I only hope this announcement is not recorded itself, but it's possible it is. Anyway, Adalberto Libera, born in 1903, I think 8 years before John Lautner, on this day, the 16th of July. And so, an extremely able and talented creative architect, more influenced by futurism than rationalism, he was also politically astute. His activity as founder and secretary of MIAR, I don't know what this stood for, enabled him to establish a close working relationship with the high-up officials of the fascist regime in Rome, where all the big decisions were taken about funding public construction programs, and who were responsible for commissioning the hundreds of new public buildings required for Mussolini's modernization programs. It's interesting actually to compare Hitler and Mussolini and their architecture. They both had a strong interest in architecture. Thanks to these connections that Libera had, he had a prolific career throughout the fascist regime and designed many notable buildings during the 1930s, some of which are masterpieces of the international modern movement. One of the most important is his Palazzo dei Congressi, the Palace of Congress at the Eur in Rome. Eur is Cartier in Romanian, is a modernistic attempt, modernistic, but also with some connections with a certain form of classicism and even rationalism. An interesting experiment. Anyway, this building shows Libera's great ability to design ambiguously in a spare metaphysical language that sits on the knife edge between modernism and neoclassicism. His use of sail vaults in this building creates an innovative architectural space. He also designed Casamala Parte for Curzio Malaparte, so the name Malaparte comes from the client, on the island of Capri, 1938, although there is continuing controversy as to whether Libera himself was the main designer. And I read an article written, an interview with Libera's daughter, where she advocated the cause of her father, but I also read opposite assessments. It seems, nevertheless, that Mr. Malaparte, the client, did have a role in the design of that building, maybe a very important role. Anyway, so during the fascist period, all architects were legally forced to join the party. But the most successful went further and became important party members. Like his contemporaries, Giuseppe Pagano and Giuseppe Terrani, Libera's good fortune in this period was due to his close party links. After the fall of the fascist regime and its defeat in the Second World War, Libera, along with everyone else, underwent a period of personal and professional crisis. But after living quietly for several years in his hometown of Trento, he recovered and began again to work on numerous projects, including public housing and office buildings, in a new style that turned its back on fascistic modes of expression. Many of his greatest projects are from this post-war period. This was the man. Yeah, he was a very skillful architect, and maybe he was also politically astute, as he is described, but maybe not astute enough if you consider that what he stood for failed, and failed tragically and miserably. Anyway, there was a fascination with the fascist movement, and there were intellectuals, artists who were openly on its side. And it was a phenomenon which perhaps is difficult to comprehend on one hand, and maybe on the other hand, not so difficult to comprehend, considering the naivete of artists and intellectuals in the political realm. Il Palazzo delle Poste, the palace of the postal for the postal works in Rome, 1933, 1935. He worked with Mario De Renzi. Good work, actually, even for by today's standards. I keep thinking when I see a work from the so-called past that would be relevant for today, I say, well, this would have been published in Arch Daily, no doubt, if it was built now. But it was not built now. It was built 90 years ago. It's in essence, it's not a complicated building, but such details as this, as you can see them in the facade, immediately creates something unusual out of a building which had nothing else unusual. Interesting that postal offices, larger or smaller, were actually battlegrounds for the new. Otto Wagner created in Vienna an impressive postal office. Now we see Libera. Also, Mario Ridolfi created one. So I guess there is maybe a book could be written or a doctoral paper could be prepared about the postal office and the avant-garde. Anyway, just a thought I just had. Palazzo delle Poste, le pietre di Roma. Pietre, the word used metaphorically, of course, in this case. On the other hand, you would ask yourself, why would the postal office need to be a palace? You know, I mean, anyway, there are interesting issues, I think, connected, potentially at least, to the relationship between the postal office and the architecture in general. This is from the same work, of course. Maybe because postal works are really about communication, no? About bridging between people and, you know, art in its essence is actually etymologically the oldest definition I found of the word art is from the Proto-Indo-European language. Art, I read in English, art equals bridge, equals God. But equals bridge, meaning connecting. It's not, it is a bridge which connects two sides. And the postal office, I guess, and the postal works is supposed to connect two. Palacina Mar, 1932, 1934. So again, almost 90 years ago. A luminous fascism, if you want to put it this way. But it's a good building. It is a good building. The people who built such buildings at the time, they didn't anticipate or didn't know that, you know, 10 years or so later, 2 atomic bombs would be dropped in Japan and countless people died and so on. So, you know, here you have a luminous architecture and not much later, the tragedy of the Second World War. This says something about our inability to actually control completely our fate. Maybe we should be less ambitious. But that balcony, you know, is almost a militant balcony. There is actually a picture, and I included it in the poster, you know, in the invitation I sent today, with Libera himself standing up at the edge of such a balcony. Interesting that this one doesn't have a parapet or a handrail. But you see here that these are balconies that do have a rhetorical power. That's why I called it before a militant balcony. You would almost expect some kind of a Führer or a commander of some sort talk from the edge of this balcony to a group of people. The school, the same, 90 years ago in Trento, which was his hometown. So we recognize again Libera because of this. He employed this something similar in the postal office. With simple means, in essence, you know, the building speaks. I don't know if it sings, but it does speak. This was the Italian pavilion at the international exhibition in Chicago in 1933. I hope I have other pictures. Yeah, this is one. Quite, I would say, very forward-looking. I mean, you know, 90 years ago, but this building, if this building was designed by Rem Koolhaas now, again, it would be considered hot, so to speak. Well, it was built 90 years ago by Libera and Mario De Renzi. Maybe there was a little bit of truth in what Dan Hanganu said in his controversial statement that good architecture needs an autocrat. And you know, these architects were connected with a political leader, with Mussolini, and you know, they had the support of the state. And I don't know, something did happen, it seems. Although what Dan Hanganu said perhaps needs some discussion. Il Palazzo del Littorio, I don't know what Littorio is, in a competition with the same architect, and another one, I don't have pictures. The Italian pavilion in Brussels this time, 1935 in Brussels. This one also interesting and engaging. I mean, you look how the people are dressed, and you look at the buildings, and the buildings are more modern than the fashion of the day, so to speak. If we look at the buildings, we are not sure exactly when they were built, but if we look at the people, how they were dressed, we kind of get an idea. When you look at the building and you look at the fragment of the vehicle, the car on the right, you see they are years apart in terms of the aesthetics. I mean, quite courageously expressed here. I mean, look at the double X. There is a level of abstraction here, and which you don't often see, especially in buildings ideologically charged. I think Mussolini and the people around him have had a good taste for architecture, and they did promote a certain level of intense modernism, as opposed to Hitler. Although when I visited Ur with some students from Bucharest a few years ago, we entered the church, which is close to it. It's part of Ur, and they all didn't believe it was a church. When they went inside, they actually were astonished by the otherness of the building. They were actually shocked almost. They didn't feel it was a church, and they didn't feel there was God or about God. It was a visceral, primitive reaction to a building which was built around that time as part of the Ur experiment in Rome. Il Palazzo dei Congressi, 1938. This was the building I read a few things about at the beginning. Sorry, these pictures are not great. I mean, the resolution is not great, but we'll see pictures a bit. This central space is still used for all kinds of exhibitions and so on. We are going to see pictures of it. So this is the Palace of Congresses in Rome by Adalberto Libera, and you can miss it. I mean, it's obviously calling you, so to speak, is emphatically announcing itself at the end of this boulevard, on which we see now cars from a different era. An interesting installation. Looks like work by Magdalena Abramovic, the Serbian artist. But I could be mistaken. Well, for for 80 something years old building is not too bad, is it? Although maybe these walls are a little bit too blunt, and these are a little bit too prison-like. But anyway, the clouds are still flying with a well-known grace on the blue sky. And again, the balcony, this one probably meant for the Führer, for the leader, for Mussolini himself to change the world from its edge, or to announce the great virtues of war. Strange that Marinetti and his followers believed in the purging power of the war. But then there was also Heraclitus, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, who also thought that war was the father of all things. But I imagine his conception of war was different than those who bombed two cities in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because it was one thing to fight with a sword and another thing to fight with atomic bombs. And finally, we arrive at the well-known Villa Malaparte from 1938, which was also present in a film, an avant-garde film. I hope I have here a picture or two with Brigitte Bardot. And anyway, yes, this building is loved by everybody, which which is enough reason, I think, for me to be a little bit suspicious a bit. When something is so popular, maybe one should have the skepticism of Oscar Wilde or of Oscar Wilde. Yeah, I mean, I didn't yet meet people who had anything to criticize about this building. This building is admired by everyone. Rationalists, romantics, classicists, traditionalists, you name them, they all like this building. And it might be that the architect was not Adalberto Libera, but Mr. Malaparte himself. It doesn't matter, he was involved. Yes, Libera was involved. There is a picture, and I don't know if I have it here, with him and the client at a table in a restaurant talking about Malaparte. Now, why is this building so famous? I was wondering, maybe I have here on this presentation the words of John Hayduck, who saw some metaphors here and even a certain mysticism. A first impression I might have is that these stairs, this stair is actually the main object of fascination. And maybe what's even more fascinating is that it doesn't have a handrail, it doesn't have a parapet. So somehow danger is, more or less subtly insinuated in the anatomy of the building. It is wide enough, so the danger is only partial. it is this growth towards the sky, but then you see you grow, you walk up on it, and then you meet a screen, which is here. So this is kind of interesting, you know, it's like before, I mean, you have to go around it in order to discover the sea. Now inside the building, of course, there are great fashion shows. The spaces are lent for all kinds of events. It is a famous, it is a famous building, and maybe because it is a house, but also it has some qualities of a temple-like. It is temple-like, and you know sloping surface with I mean the stair itself is it almost leads to some kind of an altar. It, it insinuates a certain almost religious feeling. But underneath it is a house with, you know, more or less skillfully designed spaces. And look at the windows, they are domestic. But what is above is not domestic. And, you know, the handrail and the parapet is missing here too. And, you know, if you are to go around this thing, and of course you do, you can choose this part or on the left. And it could get a little bit dangerous. So danger is part of the design in a way. And it's true, if you would place a parapet here or a handrail, the power of its architecture would be diminished. The paraphernalia of protection, as Rem Koolhaas calls it. We are obsessed with protection these days, you know, with security devices, with all kinds of gadgets, with parapets, with handrails, not to fall, not to fall, not to fall. Everything is so-called secure, but, there is a but. Something is missing. Maybe what is missing is that, you know, ingredient of adventure or danger. Yeah, here it is present. It's a good work, but it is a good work because it also has a metaphysical dimension. And I wonder how many of us today also address the metaphysical in our works. We are mostly concerned with the physical. We neglect most of the time the metaphysical. What makes this building valuable is exactly its metaphysical side, not so much the physical. I mean, yes, it is expressed physically, but its support is its essence is of a metaphysical nature. Uh, it was brought to my attention by a friend of our Zoom meetings that this site of houses is actually founded and run by a Romanian architect from Suceava, and is an excellent website, offhouses.com. If you are interested in domestic architecture in houses, this is it. You can find there thousands and thousands of exceptional houses brought together in a very discriminating way. And, it's a very well run website. And I'm happy that it originates in Suceava. Bravo to him. Look at the walls. I am asking how many of our projects in school or otherwise would easily find acceptance for this kind of aesthetics, so-called, imperfect or ruin-like, but it's appropriately so. It's about the passage of time. This is not about being sleek. And when you look through the window, you see the majesty of nature, which should humble one. But it is a great window and it is a great view. And it's almost like, you look at the frame of the window, it's like a large artwork or painting. Now, yes, John Hayduck, who was the dean at Cooper Union and one of the New York Five. In 1980, American architect John Hayduck described Alberto Libera's villa designed for Curcio Malaparte as a house of rituals and rites, of mysteries and ancient play unraveling under Italian light. Well, this is what I was trying to refer to when I used the word metaphysical. And I think any good work should handle both the physical and the metaphysical. And that's exactly what Jaime Cantacuzino said also. Jaime Cantacuzino said clearly, the architect works for man and his gods. But today we totally forgot the gods. This is the truth. I don't think you can ask 100 architects or 1,000 architects or 10,000 architects how many of them think about the gods. And I think almost none will say, I do. But the question is inevitable. What do we mean by the gods? What gods? We don't believe in gods any longer. So you would say, why should I work for man's gods when man does not have gods any longer? But maybe some gods are still maybe hiding, but maybe they are not dead. Maybe. What about the god of friendship, or the god of love, or the god of the wind, or the god of water, or the god of fire, or the god of light? So again, I think Cantacuzino was right. Man, the architect works for men, but also works for the gods of men. Unfortunately, today, almost in totality, the gods are forgotten. And I think it's a problem because the metaphysical is absent. And when the metaphysical is absent, the physical becomes very weakened. It is weak because it's not supported by that essential participant in creation, which is the metaphysical. And not just in architecture. But are we talking about the metaphysical qualities of a building in our schools or in our practice? I don't think so. Most of the time, I don't think we do. It's also located, you cannot find a more spectacular setting than this building. So, it benefits from its surroundings, of course. There is everything. There is stone, there is water, there is the sky, and there is some vegetation. So there is everything. Libera's Malaparte house is private. It is a house of paradoxes. It is an object which consumes. It is filled with unrequited histories. This is also what John Hayduck wrote. It is a relic left upon the pinnacle after the seas have subsided. It is a sarcophagus of soft cries. It whispers of inevitable fates. This is the language of a poet. Do we express ourselves in similar way? Very rarely. Why? Because we are rationalists and functionalists. We do not express ourselves in a poetical way because we are not accustomed to do it. You know, we only analyze, we only do analysis, we don't do synthesis, and we reject poetry. And, you know, it takes someone from Cooper Union, well, he's dead now, to have the courage to express himself in this, you know, maybe a little bit elusive way, but essentially in a poetical way. And I think the building deserves it. I think it is imperative that we bring back poetry to architecture, not just in the way we do a project, but also in the way we articulate thoughts or we verbalize about architecture. I think we had enough of that dry, analytical, soulless, rationalistic language, you know, really, which is so uninspiring. If you read texts by Le Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright, even Mies was a mystical, not to speak about Louis Kahn. Even Alvar Aalto, they used a very simple language, but never in a dry way, technical. No, they expressed themselves in a language that was to be understood by anybody. And there was often, like Sullivan, Louis Sullivan, for example, his writings are exalting, and they are exalting because they are poetical, because they are powerful, and they are powerfully felt, more than powerfully thought. And I would say, remember, I would say again what Nietzsche said, that the thoughts are actually the shadows of emotions. But we as rationalists think otherwise. We think that the emotions are the shadows of thoughts. I think Nietzsche was right. The thoughts are the shadows of emotions. And I think we should remember this, and I think we should have the courage to be emotional and to have the strength to express these emotions. And you cannot do it with a dry, analytical, sterile language of rationalism. No. What else can I say? Because in a way, the way we talk is the way we build. If we talk in a very dry way, our buildings will also be dry. Casamala Parte, the house that all fashion brands want. Indeed, there. I mean, you know, of course, it is a hot place to show the splendors of the ephemeral fashion. I continue to be amused by what Oscar Wilde said, that fashion is so ugly that we have to change it every 6 months. In a way, he's right. Anyway, but the truth is, you know, looking through that picture frame, because I don't even know if I can call it a window, can be inspiring to anyone. Really, I mean, you could even say this is a picture from a museum where a great artwork is displayed on the wall. Well, it is a great artwork, and the artist, his name was God, and is God. Another artwork by the same great artist, framed by man, but the artwork belongs to the one I just mentioned. Now, back to Earth. Le Palacine in Via Pesina nel complesso della città Giardino in Cagliari. Anyway, I don't have pictures. L'unità d'abitazione orizzontale in Roma, I don't have pictures. Sorry, il Pavilione, Casa in Cagliari. Here I have a picture. I hope I have more. Yes. This is also shows Libera as a sculptor almost. There is drama here, architectonic drama, and I think architecture needs drama. I mean, sculptural drama. And Yeah, it's an interesting building. Too bad my images are not the greatest, and I ask for forgiveness. But you can still see that a vigorous sculptor at work here. Yeah, a cinema, 1955. This one also rather futuristic, although futurism per se was gone by 1955. I mean the movement, the art movement. And some of its artists died in their defending the war. Curious about something here. I don't know if I have a picture from the outside now, unfortunately. But I look at the plans, and this must be the toilets, and they they are so emphatically. Yes, I have an issue because I know certain schools of architecture would not accept, such positioning of such a trivial function, in the anatomy of the building. But many architects do it. Um, so maybe certain dogmas of modernism, of a certain modernism, should be questioned. It is a great interior. I mean, this shell, that envelops the large space is impressive. It's simple but organic. La Cattedrale di Cristo, Re della Spezia, 1956-1969. Now this one, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit too emphatic, too rhetorical, not modest enough. I know a cathedral, you would say, is not modest by definition, but I don't know. I think the Gothic, the great Gothic cathedrals were both audacious and modest somehow, because they were built of fragments. You saw the little stones contributing to the whole building. Here is too monolithical and too plain and too, in a way, too overwhelming, I would say, too powerful. I think it was Joseph Brodsky who said, the great Russian poet, the youngest poet until now, or until a few years ago, who received the Nobel Prize in Poetry, who said that victorious church is a contradiction in terms. And I think it's true. It is true. Anyway, the interior is interesting, but maybe the ceiling is a little bit too flat, or appears to be flat. Something seems to be wrong, but there are interesting things here. I think he could have done better for this church or cathedral or whatever it is. But anyway, it looks more like a Congress hall than a church. If you take away the cross, you could have said this is a nice Congress hall. Well, the interior has some certain mysteries through. But not so much the exterior. Another palazzo in Trento, audacious, the cantilevered part, especially for that time when it was built. And there are interesting things here going on. You know, you look at this photograph, and you know, there is drama here. Trento. I guess he continued to work for the government. You know, even after the fall of the previous government, you see the flags, and yeah, he was able to collaborate even with another governmental authority or power. Okay, so let's wish him happy birthday, and let's go now to the second architect we pay homage to today, to John Lautner, very interesting architect himself. John Lautner, 1911, 1994. So John Edward Lautner, born on the same day, the 16th of July, but 8 years after Libera, was an American architect. Following an apprenticeship in the mid-30s with the Taliesin Fellowship led by Frank Lloyd Wright, Lautner opened his own practice in 1938, so he was 27 years old, where he worked for the remainder of his career. Lautner practiced primarily in California, and the majority of his works were residential. Lautner is perhaps best remembered for his contribution to the development of the Googie style. I didn't know what that was, I still don't, as well as for several atomic age houses. I don't know what this means either. He designed in the late 50s and early 60s, which include the Leonard Mellin House, Paul Schitt's House, and Russ Garcia House. Anyway, we'll see some of these houses. It seems he didn't study architecture, except that he was an apprentice with Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin West. This was the man. He had great appeal for clients. I mean, many people commissioned him to build spectacular houses for them. So the John Lautner house in Los Angeles is this one, an early work done by him, 1939. So he was 28 years old when he built it for himself. Very different from Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, he studied with Wright, but different architects. There are some parts that you would say might recall Frank Lloyd Wright, but all in all, his handling of his articulation of the volumes of the house is different. The Bell House, 1940, West Hollywood, a big, opulent house. This one does resemble to an extent some works by Wright. An office building, 1945, no pictures. Edgar Mauer House, 1945, Los Angeles. John Lautner. Hancock House, Silver Lake, 1945. Another house from 1946. He built many houses, and I used to know them from a long time ago. They were published almost regularly in Architecture d'Aujourd'hui and other important architectural magazines. Foster Carling House, 1947. Well, yes, these houses were not for proletarians, that's for sure. Very interesting, this view with this corner here. But everything is actually handled very well, particularly from this corner. The house, I think, is remarkable because it's not inhibited, it's not dogmatic. In a way, it's even freer than the buildings, some buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, he created an event here in the corner, a sculptural event and an architectonic event. And it's where the structure becomes ornamental. I mean, just try to imagine that he would have placed here banal, round or square column straight. It would have ruined the building. But now, like this corner is remarkable because it is surprising. It is that the accident that stirs up emotions. This table has something of the furniture by Frank Lloyd Wright. It might even be by Wright. Right left the hexagon, and you see it is hexagonal. But yeah, it has something of Frank Lloyd Wright's furniture. A motel, renamed Hotel Lautner from 1947, is not bad. Motels are usually not, high end. Now I shouldn't say high end, but they are not truly, places where you create remarkable architectures. But yeah, especially this image I like. It's a motel. It has a prosaic function, but architecture really it is robust and it has dignity and is not commercial. And this is very difficult to do with a motel. One thing is clear: architecture has to do with innovation. No, with he creates something new. Okay, maybe not flamboyantly new, but still, considering it's just a motel. And I like the way these artworks by the same great artist I mentioned before, God himself, They are beautiful, and they are natural sculptures, and they are very well displayed. Now, I don't know if he was the one who decided about this, or landscape architect, or the client, but it doesn't matter. Is a nice display of the greatness of nature. It is a surprising motel because, normally when you think of a motel, you think of a corridor with rooms on both sides and with rather regular and typical windows. Here we don't even see the windows. And it is a surprising architecture for a motel. Jacobsen House, 1947. Again, this kind of sculptural intervention of a structural element, which is, I think, a good presence. What is interesting with this house is also that it uses two systems. On one hand, a centralized roof, a hexagon, a pure hexagon, and then underneath the hexagon is a different kind of system or a different kind of arrangement. And the tension, the dialectics between the two create something dynamic. But almost all his buildings are in exceptional settings, natural settings. As opposed to Libera, who, with the exception of the Malaparta building, he was mainly in cities, or even paradigmatic city where all the roads of the world led, that is Rome. Here we are dealing with buildings in nature. And, nature is as majestic as in the Angkor Wat. Look at this tree here. It's drama. Yes, drama. An architecture which is placid is less enticing. There is drama here. A good building by John Lautner. I wonder how John Lautner would have built if he lived in the place of Adalberto Libera, meaning if he built in Rome and in Italy, and if Adalberto Libera had to do works in such natural settings as the ones in which John Lautner worked. What kind of architecture would have been done by Libera in such a natural landscape, and what kind of architecture would have done John Lautner in Rome, for example? Maybe an interesting question. I don't know the answer. Somehow the exterior is more dramatic than the interior. Maybe because of these large pieces of glass, they are a little bit, I don't think the level of fragmentation is sufficient. In fact, there is almost no fragmentation, and they are a little bit too big, I would say. Another residence, I hesitate to pronounce it, being afraid I won't pronounce it correctly. This is, I know this building from a long time ago. It is one of the paradigmatic buildings by John Lautner. Personally, I don't like it so much because it's too rhetorically so-called audacious. You know, it's too much of a, you know, look at me. But why not? I mean, there is a room, there was, at least until recently, room for even such a building in the world. It is interesting, but it is, in my opinion, a little bit too, in a facile way, too interesting. It's, in my opinion, a great work is both courageous, even audacious, and modest. And here I would say the balance between modesty and audacity is in the favor of audacity, mainly technological audacity. And it's too, you know, space age in a way. It's like unidentified flying object that landed there in the landscape. He built other buildings like this. We are going to see at least another one, but this one is the most. But we saw before his interest in you know, polygons that, you know, had the equal sides, you know, like the hexagon. And here I don't see the other system, the asymmetrical, the one to balance the centrality of what we look at. Anyway, it's a building which I guess Hollywood loves. Films are being made there, and you know, we can fantasize about an optimistic future and so on. But I think there is a but. There is a but because I think maybe the ones who said that the optimist is a coward was right. Maybe there is too much optimism in this building, technological and otherwise. But then architecture is considered to be the art of the yes. Now even Engels said, you know, yes is more. And Wolf Prix, when he asked himself, what is architecture? And he said, yes. But his answer is more subtle than Bjarke Ingels' answer. So it is a tour de force, but I still think great artwork and a great building is more than just a tour de force. And paradoxically, it is more by being less. This one is too explicitly so-called tour de force. Thus, I think is a rather facile work. Another residence, this one is interesting, very interesting because of its ceiling. It's some kind of a geometrical cave or geometrized cave. He designed also the sitting area, the furniture, the sofas. It's not bad, but and it's not bad maybe because here there is a certain ambiguity. This is a house, it's a private residence, it's a private house, but the ceiling seems to advocate a public dimension. You know, the ceiling seems to belong to the public realm, while the space is underneath. Maybe not so much here, where is the living room, which is rather large, and you could imagine it could be the, uh, some public space in a convention center or in a hotel or whatever. The level of intimacy maybe is not sufficient, but still the diagonals and the segmentations of the ceiling create an interesting work. And it extends this roofing beyond the limits of the house per se. Now look at this bed, which defies the conventional shape of a bed. But it's so large that it can afford itself to have this shape. Yes, it is an interior for a James Bond movie. It's clear. And look how that corner opens up, and you lay on that bed, and you are ready to take off in a way, to fly, uh, Batman-like above the city of Los Angeles. Now the car, the car belongs to a different time. Is interesting because if you have a nostalgic side in you, it's difficult not to have a certain affection for it. But the house again is ready to take off, but not so much the car. The plan is interesting too. But if I have a certain reticence vis-a-vis this building, is because I think in the dialogue or the dialectics between res privata and res publica, there is too much res publica here. So the public dimension, the public gestures, architectonic gestures here, or I call them public, is still a private house, but in terms of its image, it evokes something that transcends an individual or even a family, or only a family. So yeah, I would say while I think a house should have or could have also a dimension having to do with collectiveness or with the public, um, I don't think that dimension should overwhelm the other one, being that it is a house after all. It's not a, a resort hotel or I don't know what. But still, this diagonal is impressive. And you see the silhouettes of the human beings, and it is an impressive diagonal and sloping surface of the roof. Garcia House. This was the one I had in mind when I was referring to that unidentified flying object. This is somehow similar, but I prefer this one to that one because this one is less centralized and somehow a little more complex. John Lautner. Now, I don't know. I mean, the presence of the stone, which is heavy, on the upper portion of the building, considering that the building has very thin legs, is a little bit problematic. But you see, this stone element here, this man here is not even arriving at the earth. So it's an, I don't know, these architectonic acrobatics could be a little questionable. But otherwise, I mean, it is an interesting building. The circular house, circular it is indeed. At least this portion, this part of it. All of it is, I only found a picture with this. Yes, the circular house. Now Arango Marbrisa house. A lot of concrete here. I think this house is actually in Mexico. It's not in the United States. It's not in the United States. I like the way, you have this road that enters the house actually. It's visceral, and I think it's a nice thing. Now, of course, these houses are not sustainable, so we shouldn't evaluate his work in the terms of our days, of sustainability now. There aren't too many traces of modesty here. This is a house for some self-confident clients, I would say. And it was built by a self-confident architect. Bob Hope was a celebrity in the United States, and I'm glad that he commissioned John Lautner to do this again. Not the most immodest house in the world, not the most modest house in the world. Sorry. Not all celebrities in the States really have a liking of a certain kind of progressive architecture. If we are to call this progressive, maybe we could debate about this. But I remember that another one, I forgot his name, he used to be famous when I lived in the States, and he demolished a building by John Johansson, which was next door to his, and it's true, it was abandoned, but it was one of the best buildings by John Johansson, a very talented architect, and I just couldn't believe it. Anyway, it's interesting, this opening in the roof. It does make you think about what is beyond man, beyond the human being, I would say. Now I wonder, does it rain and snow through that opening? I guess it does. Is there a glass or not? It cannot be so big, or I don't know. It seems to be bigger than the Oculus at the Pantheon in Rome. But if we remember what Mircea Eliade said, briser le toit de ta maison, break the roof of your house, here it is. It's in a way, it's the opening of a possible dialogue between the earth and the sky through that emphatic, round opening. John Lautner. The purpose of architecture is to create timeless, free, joyous spaces for all activities of life. Well, if it was so easy. I mean, of course he's right, but we saw his buildings, they were not done for proletarians. They were done for a certain elite, which afforded, extravagant houses. But beyond certain limitations having to do maybe with the time when he built, I would say that we should consider his work in positive terms, and maybe we could even be, approximately happy that he built them. The purpose of architecture, I read this already, but this is the architect with a big forehead, and we know what that means. Um, you know, the building that he designed was indeed for some kind of demigods or semi-gods from Hollywood or otherwise. So let's wish him happy birthday, and let's appreciate